Gemini in the 10th house, the hidden authority that turns curiosity into career legacy. Gemini, let me speak to you without disguise. There is a quiet tension inside you whenever the word career is spoken aloud. Not because you lack ambition, and not because you lack ability, but because something in you resists being pinned down, named, finalized. You sense that the world wants a clear answer from you. Who are you, really? What do you stand for? What is your role? And while others rush to respond with titles, ladders, and long-term plans, you hesitate. You feel the pressure of visibility without the comfort of certainty. And this is not accidental. This is the 10th house calling you into a deeper confrontation with yourself. You were born with a mind that moves faster than systems can contain. Gemini energy is mercurial, curious, adaptive, relational, alive. You learn in layers, speak in bridges, and live in motion. But the 10th house, the house of career, reputation, and legacy, asks for something that feels foreign to your nature: coherence. It asks you not only to move but to stand, not only to speak but to represent. And that is where the tension begins. Because deep down, Gemini, you are afraid that if you stand still long enough, you will be misunderstood, reduced, simplified, locked into a version of yourself that no longer fits. So instead, you explore. You diversify. You keep multiple doors open. You stay intellectually agile and professionally flexible. On the surface, this looks like freedom, but beneath it, there is a subtle exhaustion, a sense that you are capable of more impact than you are currently allowing yourself to hold. You are not afraid of failure. You are afraid of being defined too early. And yet, the irony of the 10th house is this. Without definition, your gifts scatter into echoes, instead of forming a legacy. Here is the core burden Gemini carries in relation to the 10th house. A fractured relationship with authority, both external and internal. You question systems instinctively. You distrust rigid hierarchies. You sense that many structures of power are outdated, performative, or hollow, and you are often right. But this skepticism has a shadow. Because when you reject authority outside yourself, you may also delay claiming authority within yourself. You remain the commentator, the analyst, the connector, rarely the final voice in the room. Not because you cannot be, but because stepping into that role feels like a loss of freedom. The 10th house is not just about success. It is about visibility under judgment. It is the place where the world watches you and forms conclusions. And Gemini, being seen without the chance to explain every nuance, can feel unbearable. You want to be understood in full context, in all versions, across all moods and phases. But the public world does not work that way. The public world recognizes patterns, consistency, signals. It does not ask who you might be, it responds to who you repeatedly show yourself to be. And this is where Gemini often feels trapped between potential and presence. You may notice this pattern repeating. Opportunities arise that require long-term commitment, a clear public role, or a narrowing of focus, and something in you pulls back. You rationalize it as boredom, misalignment, or timing. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's fear disguised as freedom. Fear that once you choose, you will no longer be allowed to change. Fear that if you claim authority, you will be held accountable for it. Fear that legacy demands responsibility, not just brilliance. Astrologically, the 10th house is the highest point of the chart. It is where the soul meets society. And for Gemini, this meeting can feel exposing, because your gift is multiplicity, but your task is synthesis. The world does not need all your ideas at once. It needs the thread that connects them. And the burden you carry is not a lack of direction, it is an overabundance of direction without a center. This is why Gemini often feels underestimated or misread professionally. People sense your intelligence but struggle to place you. They admire your adaptability but question your staying power, and this can trigger a deep internal conflict. If they don't see me clearly, maybe I shouldn't stay long enough for them to try. But that instinct, while protective, also keeps you from the very recognition your soul is seeking. The truth is uncomfortable but liberating. The 10th house does not ask Gemini to become less flexible. It asks Gemini to become more intentional. Authority is not rigidity, it is clarity. Legacy is not permanence, it is impact sustained over time. And the burden you feel is not a sign that you are failing the 10th house. It is a sign that you are standing at its threshold. Because Gemini, when you finally choose to gather your many voices into one coherent signal, the world does not lose your magic, it finally hears it. Gemini, now we turn the mirror inward, because the real confrontation of the 10th house does not happen on a resume, a stage, or a public platform. It happens in the quiet moment when you imagine being truly seen. Not admired, not praised, but known. This is where the shadow emerges. Ask yourself this without rushing to answer. Who are you when the world is watching, and you are no longer allowed to change the story mid-sentence? Who are you when your words carry consequences beyond curiosity? When your ideas are no longer possibilities, but positions? The shadow of Gemini in the 10th house is not incompetence, it is avoidance through intelligence. You are so gifted at explaining, contextualizing, reframing, and expanding that you can unconsciously use these talents to stay just one step away from full embodiment. You speak about truth more easily than you stand inside it. You describe authority more comfortably than you inhabit it. And this creates a subtle split between your inner knowing and your outer presence. There is a part of you that believes authority requires certainty, and certainty feels dishonest to a mind that sees many sides at once. You worry that if you claim a position, you are betraying your intelligence, that if you commit to a role, you are abandoning other versions of yourself. So instead of declaring, you suggest. Instead of claiming, you question. Instead of anchoring, you orbit. This is not weakness, Gemini. This is a defense. Somewhere in your history, personal or karmic, you learned that being fixed made you vulnerable. Perhaps you were judged too quickly. Perhaps you were misunderstood when you spoke with confidence. Perhaps you learned that curiosity kept you safe, while certainty invited criticism. So you adapted. You became agile. You became clever. You became difficult to pin down. But the 10th house does not reward cleverness alone. It asks for integrity of presence. It asks, when people speak your name, what energy follows. Not what you could do, but what you are known for. And this is where the shadow tightens. Because being known feels like being limited. Yet what is truly limiting is remaining invisible to your own power. The inner mirror of the 10th house shows you something uncomfortable. You may be hiding behind versatility to avoid being held accountable for impact. When everything is possible, nothing is demanded. When you remain fluid, no one expects consistency. And while this protects your freedom, it also dilutes your influence. The world does not ask Gemini to shrink, it asks Gemini to choose where to concentrate. There is also a deeper fear beneath this, the fear of judgment without dialogue. Gemini thrives in conversation, in exchange, in mutual discovery. But public roles are not conversations, they are projections. People will interpret you without asking. They will decide who you are without context, and this can feel like a betrayal of your essence. So you delay stepping fully into the light, hoping that if you stay mobile enough, you can always correct the narrative. But Gemini, here is the shadow truth. You cannot control how you are seen by refusing to be seen. Silence does not protect your truth. It only leaves it undefined, and an undefined truth will be defined by others. The 10th house is ruthless in this way. It does not care how complex you are internally. It reflects what you consistently embody, and this can feel unfair to a sign whose nature is multiplicity. But this is not a punishment, it is an initiation. Because the world does not need all of you at once. It needs the part of you that is willing to stand long enough to be trusted. Notice how often you may step back just as momentum builds. How you may change direction when recognition begins to solidify. How you may downplay your expertise by presenting it as just curiosity or one of many interests. This is the shadow whispering. If I don't claim it, I can't lose it. But legacy is not built through possession, it is built through presence. The inner mirror of the 10th house asks you to confront a simple but unsettling question. Are you willing to be misunderstood temporarily in order to be impactful long-term? Are you willing to let your work speak before your explanations catch up? Are you willing to let one version of you lead, even while others remain alive inside? This is not about becoming rigid. It is about becoming recognizable. The shadow dissolves, not when you abandon your multiplicity, but when you stop using it as a hiding place. Authority, for Gemini, is not the end of curiosity, it is the moment curiosity finds its spine. And when that happens, something shifts. You no longer feel watched, you feel witnessed. You no longer fear judgment, you outgrow it. Because the world is no longer guessing who you are. It is responding to what you have chosen to stand for. Gemini, this is where the transformation begins, not through effort, not through ambition, but through alchemy. The 10th house does not ask you to gather more knowledge. You already carry more information, more insight, more perspective than most people you encounter. What it asks instead is something far subtler and far more powerful. Integration. Alchemy is not about adding, it is about transmutation. And for you, the great transmutation of the 10th house is the shift from information to influence. Information moves quickly, influence endures. Information excites the mind. Influence reshapes direction. And this is the moment where your scattered brilliance learns how to stand in one place long enough to change the room. Here is the hidden truth. Authority was never meant to come from certainty for you. It comes from synthesis. You were not designed to be the loudest voice or the most rigid expert. You were designed to be the translator of complexity, the one who sees patterns across fields, languages, systems, and experiences, and weaves them into something the world can actually use. This is why the 10th house belongs to you in a way you may not yet realize. When Gemini aligns with the 10th house, career stops being a job and becomes a signal, a recognizable frequency. People don't just ask what you do, they feel what you represent. And this is how legacy forms, not through repetition of tasks, but through repetition of meaning. The same essence expressed across time, across platforms, across phases of life. The alchemical mistake Gemini often makes is believing that choosing one path means abandoning all others. This is false. The 10th house does not ask you to amputate your curiosity. It asks you to organize it. Think of your mind as a constellation rather than a scatter of stars. Each idea retains its brilliance, but together they form a shape that others can recognize. That shape is your vocational identity. This is where influence replaces anxiety. When you stop legacy from being a future concept and allow it to be a present alignment, something inside you settles. You no longer feel pressured to explain yourself endlessly. You let your work, your presence, and your consistency do the explaining. Influence grows not because you speak more, but because you speak from the same center again and again. The 10th house is the house of public responsibility. But responsibility does not mean burden. It means responsibility, the ability to respond to the world with coherence. And coherence is what transforms Gemini's natural adaptability into trust. People trust what they can recognize. They follow what feels internally aligned. They remember what carries a clear signal. Here is the alchemy in its simplest form. Gemini stops asking, "What else could I do?" and begins asking, "What am I already doing that carries weight?" The answer is rarely dramatic. It is usually subtle. It lives in the themes that follow you across time, the questions people consistently bring to you, the roles you inhabit naturally even when you resist them. That is the gold hidden inside your lead. When you allow one version of yourself to step forward as the public representative of your inner world, influence begins to accumulate. Not explosively, but steadily. And steady is what legacy requires. You begin to see how your words shape decisions, how your presence anchors groups, how your clarity creates direction for others. This is not ego, this is function. The world needs translators who can also stand. The alchemy of the 10th house teaches you that authority is not domination, it is orientation. You help others orient themselves in complexity. You point without imprisoning. You guide without dictating. And because this comes naturally to you, you may have underestimated its value. But legacy is often built from what feels obvious to us and extraordinary to others. Gemini, this is the moment where you realize something quietly profound. You were never meant to choose between freedom and impact. Your freedom becomes meaningful when it is channeled. Your impact becomes sustainable when it is rooted. And the 10th house is not asking you to become someone else, it is asking you to finally inhabit the center of who you already are. This is where career becomes contribution. This is where visibility becomes service. And this is where your many voices stop competing and start harmonizing. Gemini. Transformation only becomes real when it enters the body of daily life. The 10th house does not ask for a grand announcement or a sudden reinvention. It asks for presence. Repeated, grounded, unmistakable presence. This is where legacy stops being a concept and becomes a lived rhythm. Practical presence begins with how you show up when no one is applauding. It is in the way you speak about your work, the way you hold your role, the way you allow your name to mean something specific over time. You may notice a temptation to constantly refresh your identity, to update, reframe, explain, pivot. But the 10th house asks you to resist this impulse just long enough for recognition to take root. Consistency is not confinement. It is the soil in which trust grows. Living the 10th house as a Gemini means choosing coherence over novelty in your public expression. This does not mean doing the same thing forever. It means letting one core signal guide all the variations. When you write, speak, teach, lead, or create, there is a central thread that people can feel even if they cannot name it. That thread is what turns your versatility into credibility. Notice how often you may soften your authority with humor, disclaimers, or self-minimization. This is an old habit, a way to remain approachable and unthreatening. But practical presence requires a gentle correction, allowing yourself to stand without apology. Not louder, not harsher, simply clearer. You do not need to convince others of your value. You need to stop retreating from it. The 10th house also lives in boundaries, how you protect your energy and your time. Gemini often says yes out of curiosity or connection, then feels scattered and overextended. But legacy is not built from exhaustion. It is built from discernment. Each commitment you make either strengthens your public signal or diffuses it. Learning to say no is not rejection, it is alignment. In practical terms, this may look like allowing one role, one message, or one platform to lead your public life, even while other interests remain alive privately. It may look like staying visible during phases, when you would normally disappear to recalibrate. It may look like trusting that your message does not need constant evolution to remain relevant. Depth comes from staying, not from cycling. Living the change also means redefining success. For Gemini, success often feels fleeting, attention comes quickly and leaves just as fast. But the 10th house measures success differently. It measures how often people return to you for orientation, not novelty. How often your voice steadies rather than excites. How often your presence clarifies rather than stimulates. These are quieter metrics, but they endure. You may feel an internal resistance here, a voice that says, if I slow down, I'll get bored. If I commit, I'll lose inspiration. But inspiration does not disappear when you commit, it deepens. When you stop scattering your energy, your curiosity turns inward and becomes wisdom. Your ideas stop chasing relevance and start shaping it. Practical presence also involves allowing yourself to be associated with outcomes. The 10th house is not just about expression, it is about results. This can feel heavy to Gemini, who prefers process over pressure. But results do not have to be rigid. They can be relational, educational, cultural, symbolic. Legacy is not only what you build, it is what you leave activated in others. As you live this energy, something subtle changes in how the world responds to you. People listen differently. Opportunities come with more respect and fewer explanations required. You are no longer invited because you are interesting. You are invited because you are reliable, not predictable, but dependable. This is the quiet authority of the 10th house settling into your bones. Gemini. Practical presence is not about becoming serious. It is about becoming anchored. When your mind and your public role stop pulling in different directions, the noise inside you softens. You feel less urgency to prove, less pressure to pivot, less fear of being left behind. Because you are no longer chasing recognition, you are generating resonance. And resonance, once established, does not need to be chased. It draws. Gemini, legacy is not something you build at the end of your life. It is something you inhabit while you are still becoming. The 10th house was never asking you to decide who you are forever. It was asking you to decide who you are willing to stand as now, even while you remain unfinished. If this message reached you, it is not because you are late. It is because you are ready to stop circling your potential and begin inhabiting it. You do not need to silence your many voices. You only need to let one of them speak long enough for the world to recognize the truth behind it. Legacy does not come from being everything. It comes from being present as something real. There is a quiet relief that arrives when you stop explaining yourself and start allowing your presence to speak. When you no longer fear being misunderstood, because you trust that clarity grows through consistency. When you realize that authority does not steal your freedom, it protects your impact. The world does not ask you to be certain. It asks you to be coherent. So instead of asking what your career will become, sit with a different question. What does your name activate in others right now? Not someday. Not when everything is resolved. But in this moment. Because the legacy you are meant to leave is not waiting in the future. It is forming each time you choose to show up as the same essence. Again and again. If this reflection resonated, stay with this channel. These messages are not meant to tell you who to be. They are meant to help you recognize who you already are when the noise falls away. Let me know in the comments what part of your public self you are ready to stand in without apology. And if you feel the pull to continue this journey of integration, subscribe not for predictions, but for presence.